Hello, friends. I continue to think that I will always finish in the evening, but yesterday was a very busy day with the pre-full moon and sacred pentagram programs. So, in fact, here we are on the day of the full moon, the 24th of June, 2021. And we stopped at a point, though, that I think was justifiable. We've been talking about the call going forth from the ashram. Well, let's call it the call of the hierarchy. And we want to see now what types of people respond to that call. So our little segue here tells us prepares us for the idea that different types of people respond. DK says here, let us look at some of the types of people who respond to the call. Most of them do so unconsciously. Of course, that's the advantage of being a student of esotericism. Perhaps we recognize then what the call really is, and our response is more conscious. So most of them who respond to the call do so unconsciously, but react sympathetically, because something in them synchronizes with the call, or because they are sensitive to certain vibratory influences. Now, frankly, we wish for more and more people to respond to the call of hierarchy, which will surely intensify during the age of Aquarius forthcoming. So this takes us, and I hope, to our last program. That's my hope anyway. In this section on the 6 stages of discipleship. So let's take a look. Who is responding? Well, number one, there are the true lovers of humanity who, though they may have absolutely no knowledge of esotericism, yet care enough to do what they can to help. These are very valuable people. Unconsciously to them, they can be used by the hierarchy to do good and efficiently selfless work. And here we come to the idea that they are frequently more constructive than pledged or accepted disciples because they are unconscious of status, of any responsibility in an ashram, and of their individual importance. Perhaps certain things, if they are gotten out of the way, certain considerations, we will find that they are no longer obstructive preoccupations. Now, these true lovers of humanity, sometimes we wonder whether we as disciples are that. We should be. And they have absolutely no knowledge of esotericism. We wonder if we can begin to express what they naturally and unconsciously express. That's often our question. They are unconscious of their status, and that is a big obstruction for so many disciples. They are very much status conscious, and it preoccupies their thoughts, and as a result, a real problem of obstruction does arise. It would seem that such people have a great deal of the second ray in their makeup, one way or the other. It can be the well-trained personality. It can be unconsciously to them the second ray soul, or certainly unconsciously to them the second ray monad. Anyway, they are unplagued by the kind of constant lower self concern which afflicts the accepted disciple, or those, let's say, who know quite a bit, at least academically, about esotericism. Now, who else responds to this call of the hierarchy? Psychics everywhere, throughout the world, and of all kinds. So that's another grouping that we have to take into consideration. They respond to those upon the astral plane who are catching the higher impression, or who telepathically get some aspect of the projected idea. In such cases, there is always glamour, distortion, and misrepresentation. So the response is there, but the value of the response is in question. Now, DK, tells us what happens. Notice that he does list the psychics below the probationary disciples. It's an earlier stage. It's so necessary for people no longer to be especially proud of their lower psychism. We've been told that even the animals share this. But since we are not trained in these matters, or since the psychics are not trained, they don't believe it. So anyway, this kind of response, because there is always glamour, distortion, and misrepresentation, this causes, says DK, much trouble, but is a force with which the leaders and teachers of humanity must reckon. It affects the least intelligent of the masses of men and does give some general, even if distorted, idea of the plan, but is apt, and this will cause cleavage, but is apt to revolt the intellectual and complicate the work of the trained disciple. So it's an early stage, relatively speaking. But the masters, as they look upon humanity, have to take all kinds of people into consideration. It is a force. With which the leaders and teachers of humanity must reckon. We do recognize, I think, what an onerous task it is to lead and teach warring, deluded, often deluded humanity. And I wonder if some of the conspiracy theories of the present day are not arising through some kind of psychic anticipation, which of course is filled with that which blocks the true higher energy from coming through, finally blocking buddhi from the astral plane. But now we're heading into those who respond to the call, knowing more about it. So also here, probationary disciples who receive and respond to the impression more promptly and clearly than the above group. even though they are not yet accepted disciples. They have some idea as to the truth of that which filters through under the influence of their guiding disciple and under their growing soul influence. Now, these probationary disciples receive it through the vision and teaching of a senior disciple. Remember, when you are a chela in the light, you are still a probationary disciple. And not until you have become an accepted disciple are you the true disciple, passing out of that specific stage of probation, though it seems to me that, in a way, testing always continues. So remember, there is a senior disciple reporting to the master on the state, progress of the chela in the light. That senior disciple still has something to accomplish, but at least there is a rapport between him and the master, and he can convey the doings, the attitudes of the chela in the light. Now, about these probationary disciples, DK goes on, their service to the plan is frequently spoiled by their ignorance. Note, he did not say that regarding the people of good heart, the lovers of humanity. Here he's talking about the increasingly mentally focused aspirant disciple. Their service to the plan is frequently spoiled by their ignorance, their self-centeredness, for which decentralization is the antidote, and their misinterpretation of the imparted teaching. Now, that misinterpretation is this is part of illusion. Their approach, both to the truth and to the teacher, is too personal. Now, maybe it's only when a direct relationship with the master at times of the master's choosing is beginning to occur, and the disciple becomes an accepted disciple, that the possibility of greater transpersonality and greater impersonality through the building of the antikarana occurs. Now, it's too bad that they, knowing more than the person of good heart, frequently cannot make the most of their knowledge because they lock themselves in other ways. So let's stop to pause. You are somewhat, and I am somewhat, let us say, aware of the teacher along whose line we will ascend. What does it take to create this necessary impersonality in relation to the teacher and his ashram? And I would say a conviction as to the big picture. Knowing or seeing the master, the teacher, in the context of this, it seems to be ever expanding picture of reality. That's what it seems to take, and probably other requirements as well. Now we have to cure this personality influence, because we are of little use to the master if we think of him in terms too personal. Then there is the category of accepted disciples who get the master's idea and plans in greater completeness, but fail often to work them out as they should be in the world of daily living and of service, because they are so preoccupied with their own problems as disciples and with their own character training and with their status in the master's ashram and supposedly his interest in them. Well, we can understand how the disciple becomes more self-absorbed. He now has the equipment, the insight, the knowledge of esotericism to become self-absorbed and to wonder how he's doing, how he is regarded by the rest of the ashram, and especially by the master. Notice that DK didn't have anything really bad to say at all about the lover of humanity. That seems to come first. But he does point out certain dangers as we move ahead in that list of those who can understand more of esotericism. Now, this is the big statement. If they, the accepted disciples, would only forget themselves their difficulties and their individual interpretations of truth, and just love their fellow men and each other. And if they would simply obey to the point of crucifixion, the order of service, they would pass more rapidly through the various stages of discipleship. Now, are we in a position to simply do what the Tibetan says here? Forget ourselves and our difficulties and our precious interpretations of truth, and just love their fellow men the way the lovers of humanity in the first and largely unconscious category are successful in doing. But so often these others receiving the master's call and the call of the hierarchy are increasingly mentally focused. And that sometimes stifles the heart response. Then there are those disciples who are close to the master's heart. And we remember from yesterday, perhaps, that to be within the master's heart is different from being close to the master's heart. So what about that? They are world disciples, which mean they play a significant role along some line of discipleship training or illumination. And they are constantly within the aura of the master. They usually play their part successfully. And their success is largely due to their constant group awareness and to a deep humility. Remember, an adjusted sense of right proportion. The more proportionally we see things, the more successful will be our group work and our service. So usually they play their part successfully, and their success is largely due to constant group awareness. Okay. We're on page 771. And they too respond to the call of hierarchy. Now, let's pause for a moment. Has the call of hierarchy come to you? How are you, given these 5 choices, responding to the call of hierarchy? in the very topmost manner, knowing the plan of the master and the plan of hierarchy as a whole, maybe then you are a world disciple. Or is your response more academic, and do you fail to bring through at least an appropriate aspect of what you know? Or do these ideas come to you probably from a senior supervising disciple? Or are you in the second stage of psychism? I doubt it. Or the first stage where you are a true, pure lover of humanity. Probably one of the three later stages is your method of response and mine too. So it's important to know then the category in which we find ourselves and how it is that we respond. I assume we do respond. I assume that. One gets the idea, the impression that it is really the love of one's fellow human beings that at whatever stage it may occur, it is the most important. And maybe every day we should practice in some measure this will to love. Not just those who are the near ones and the dear ones, but those we meet and with whom we normally have not too much to do, and sometimes one's enemies, with Christ behind that idea, which seems preposterous to so many. Love your enemy. I think I first heard that when I was a very young person. And it didn't make sense to me at the time. But at the same time, your enemy is yourself. Once we strip away all these things that we think we are, which are cases of mistaken identity, The Tibetan goes on, there is little more that I can say to you at all, or can say to you all at this time anent group work and relationships. There is an esoteric loyalty, which is different to the ordinary world loyalty, which I seek to see develop in the group. Now, even the mafia and organized crime groups and certain apparently high individuals insist on an outer loyalty because of their insecurity, really. Some of you, particularly those who take quick refuge in self-defense, not bothering to look over and self-examine what this response to the call of hierarchy will mean. Some of you need to learn this silent loyalty, which serves to integrate the group as one. I've rarely seen groups that possess it in full measure. So you need to learn this silent loyalty, which preserves the group as one. It is easy in self-defense to sacrifice one's brothers and one's fellow workers. It is not easy to heal the subjective rift thus made. Well, there was a slight interruption there, but DK is trying to develop in us something that is not superficial and will not allow us to sacrifice our brother in the spirit of our own self-defense. He tells us we need to learn which the silent loyalty which serves to integrate the group as one. And that occurs on the level very much of thought first. So things can be seeming to go well outwardly, and yet the real loyalty is not there. Everyone can test himself. It is not easy, he tells us, to heal the subjective rift thus made when we, through thought or word or action, sacrifice our brothers or our fellow workers. Just question yourself, of course. How often does it go on for you? And I can question for myself and know that there still is work to be done. So clear thinking, says the Tibetan, is needed along many lines as the group begins to cohere and work together in the spirit of unity. Clear thinking. the group in so many ways has to come first. And that is not a natural personality attitude. It has to be cultivated. An acute discrimination is also required. These are days when the lines of demarcation between the forces of materialism and the forces of light must be clearly defined. He's writing here, I think, in the 1930s, before the World War II, when the contrast between the way of love and goodwill and the way of cruelty and hate is being clearly defined on earth, disciples must exercise an unprejudiced attitude. Well, certainly they must see clearly. And in those days, it was being defined. The United Nations, as they were called at the time, stood for the way of love and goodwill. The Axis powers at the time stood for cruelty of an unbelievable kind and for hate. Still, it was necessary to look on with clear discrimination. And now DK addresses the particular group that he's working with. In 1939, that the groups were reconstituted. And it looks like he's talking to a larger and reorganized group of his chevas. To this group comes the difficult task of standing firmly on the physical plane against that which is destructive and hateful in the true sense of the word, doing all that can be done to bring the destructive energies to an end and to final powerlessness, and at the same time preserving an inner attitude of complete harmlessness and loving understanding. Now, that's quite a task. Bring hatred and cruelty to an end. The idea is the sin is condemned, but not the sinner. So yes, there is a taking of sides. And there is a ranging against that which is destructive and hateful, promoted by these lords of wicked pride and hateful lust, bringing these forces to a final powerlessness. We have to remember that they are human beings And as a result, there can be transformation into their truer nature. For my brothers, he goes on, there are principles and ideals in the world at this time worth struggling for. But whilst the struggle is on, it is necessary consciously to preserve and create that field of living, loving energy, which will eventually bridge the gap between the two opposing factors and groups, and so enable later contact to be made. For my brothers, there are principles and ideals worth struggling for. At the same time, he says there are worse fates than death, and that the gap can be bridged. As we hope even now, seeing the lines of cleavage between the warring factions still persisting and still animated by those lords of darkness or the lords of light. The battle is not over. But he's trying to stimulate his disciples to seek for the unity, even while remaining steadfastly opposed to that which the hateful groups attempt to precipitate upon humanity. Some of you, he says, are not thinking with sufficient clarity about the issues involved, being unduly engrossed with the outer signs of the struggle, and so losing the long-range perspective. Maybe it's not so uncommon that this happened. Maybe he could say that of us today, that we're not thinking with sufficient clarity, and we are engrossed with outer indications of the struggle which is going on behind the scenes. Maybe not too much has changed. The dual life of active world participation in opposing that which is seeking to hold back and to destroy humanity and its highest ideals, and at the same time preserve a steady attitude of love, is not an easy one, particularly for some of you. So part of it, maybe we can indicate this way, and yet at the same time, preserve a steady attitude of love. Now, can you do that? Can I do that? that seems to solve the problem that earlier in the 30s, that nothing critical must be said of these other groups, but critical action or the action which opposes has to be offered. There are so many cleavages today that surely we regard some individuals and groups as ignorant and really against a higher form of human development. And, well, I'm biased, I guess, but of course, one sees that. One, as a student of esotericism, one just has to see that there are those who are working against the true elevation and even salvation of humanity, working instead, a chilling thought, for its destruction. And such a possibility, says the Tibetan, can be visioned. He mentions it several times, and there have been interventions which really have prevented the destruction of humanity. Think of the Lords of Liberation somehow ensuring that the secrets of destruction through atomic energy came, practically speaking, to the Allies first, and only then later were those secrets deemed the public possession of everyone, even the negative nations. So all of this contest is going on, and shall humanity survive? I'm sure there have been moments of uncertainty. So maybe all of us will find it somewhat difficult to preserve opposition and love at the same time. Such is human integration today, that it is not possible for any person or groups of people to isolate themselves away from human activity and human welfare. And even now, less so than when this was written. Master Decay has told us that people eventually will lose the privacy in which to sin. You know, you have to, I'm reminded of this. So, you know, in some countries, they trap little birds in some kind of glue They can't escape. Then they eat them. Okay. But they put traditionally some kind of covering over the head so that God will not see them do that. The craziness of some of these human conceptions just takes your breath away. But such it is. You cannot isolate yourself from the all-seeing eye, from the Sanat Kumara, from the planetary logos, from the Christ and the masters of the Ray ashrams, and maybe, if it's indicated, your own master. You cannot. And we cannot avoid being our brother's keeper. We know that Cain killed Abel in the Bible, and then God asked him, "Where's your brother? What about your brother?" And Cain said, "Well, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" But indeed, we are our brother's keeper. And our brothers are in a far more wide-ranging group than we can normally imagine. Of course, that whole story about Cain, who is really Vulcan, and Abel, the shepherd, is a story about spiritual will versus desire. So it does have a positive suggestion. Anyway, no isolation. And less and less so shall there be isolation. It's almost as if you have to do everything under the light of your conscience, which is as if an observer from the higher worlds. We cannot hide away from the higher governing principles. And what else is not possible? Nor is a negative attitude adequate to the solution of the present world crisis. He criticized some of his disciples, or at least analyzed for them their condition, and said, "Look, some of you are doing less for the war effort than just ordinary people who know nothing of what you know." So a negative attitude is not adequate to the solution of the present world crisis. Those who refuse to share in the world karma and pain will find their entire progress inevitably slowed down, for they will have put themselves outside the great tide of spiritual force, now sweeping in regenerating streams throughout the world. I sometimes marvel at the way the Tibetan and Alice Bailey devised a kind of English which is so very evocative of deep understanding. Outside the great tide of spiritual force, now sweeping in regenerative streams throughout the world. Don't you love that phrase? Sweeping in regenerating streams. I guess I was saying regenerative, but sweeping in regenerating streams. It amounts to the same thing. And I would say are still sweeping. And although it may be painful to immerse ourselves in the karma and in the general pain of humanity, it's part of the acceleration of the group process and the acceleration of human progress. The present world conflict is analogous to the stern conflict which is going on within the hearts and lives of all world aspirants and disciples, and is inevitably a sign that they are setting their feet upon the path of conscious discipleship. So we graduates, eventual graduates of the school of releasing sorrow and purifying pain, don't just arrive at graduation. We have to, along the way, allow ourselves to be immersed in the karma and the pain. Now, sometimes an excessive accumulation of what we call wealth, money, etc., that which all men, it seems, except the few who are trained, desire. And we thereby curtail our own progress when we accumulate so much that we can buy anything we want and are never stopped by karma in the world or by necessity. So sometimes, wouldn't you say, it is an advantage not to have a glut of available symbolic resource, because then we have to become resourceful instead. And people who imagine we live one life, one incarnation, though they would not call it that, one life, and imagine that this living of the one life signals some form of success. We just have to say that it does not signal spiritual success. So there is a stern conflict which is going on in the hearts and minds of all disciples. And there's just no escape, nor should there be an attempt to escape from it. It seems in some ways independent of what rays you possess in your energy system. But let's just say that it's also a general. It is a general condition with some ray combinations more prone to vigorous enactment of the conflict, and others less so. The higher self, let's call it the angel of the presence, and the personality meet face to face for the determination of that decision for which the soul, the self upon its own plane, is waiting. And we could think of the solar angel upon the Buddhic plane, but we could also think of that active part of our soul, which is upheld by the angel of the presence. So there is a waiting for the outcome of that meeting. And that meeting so if this is happening in the life of the individual disciple, it is certainly happening analogously in the life of humanity. So DK goes on to say, this is what is also happening with the world aspirant, this confrontation within ourselves, yes, within our groups, yes, but also, more importantly, within the world aspirant, humanity. At this time, ponder with care upon this idea. We live in very conflicted times, probably because of the change of cycles, vast cycles, during the relatively brief period of 2,000 years, and even of the 2,000 years ahead, both have been changing and will be changing. And the time long awaited and long foretold is with us. The whole of creation groaneth and travaileth, waiting for the sons of God to appear. And this, of course, means a greater influence of the solar angel, the angel of the presence, and of those human personalities who can be affected by the angel of the presence and the solar angel. So we're really on the precipice of great and positive changes within humanity after so many years of mortal combat. DK goes on. It is not possible for members of the new group of world servers to divorce themselves from the acute situation now to be seen and felt. We often reach a time when things are so tough. So we imagine in our lives that we would like to escape it all. That's a Piscean pill. Escape all of it. But it's not allowed. For a true server, it's not allowed. And the person remain a true server. Once you are committed as a member of the new group of world servers, you are in a very important relationship with hierarchy. You are an instrument or part of a larger instrument for hierarchy, and it would be a shame and a defeat and a failure to, in this instance, once again, put your hand to the plow and then turn back. I trust that we all have the ability to keep going regardless of the pain, regardless of the pettiness of circumstance, and what Master DK calls in an arresting phrase, the dire pain of life itself. And by that he means life upon the lower planes. They cannot, the true disciple, true aspirant, cannot and must not escape into a cul-de-sac of personal training and individual interests. Think about that. You know, to what extent is that possible escape taking place in our lives? So we are being, you know, in an old saying, in a way, put against the wall, and there's nowhere backwards to run and still remain a true aspirant or disciple, a true member of the new group of world servers. So this is a warning, as he tells us. If that is your attitude, then there is little that I can say, little that I can do for you. For this would indicate to me an inability to differentiate in values, a desire to retreat in thought from the unhappy and the unpleasant, and to shift responsibility onto the shoulders of others. It indicates quite a lot, doesn't it? If we just give ourselves over to personal training and individual interests, plus there would be, he says, a failure to identify yourselves with humanity. Now, every true aspirant and disciple is increasingly identified with as humanity. And how else can you be of use in service except to do that? So there are things to be attended to which correlate with the pain experienced in the outer world. And of these experiences, we must be cognizant. Otherwise, no longer entertain the idea that we are truly members of the new group of world servers. Now, you can tell the Tibetan is winding up here in one of those synthetic, inspiring statements. Every teacher should remember how he does this, because he wants to call his students to action and not simply to a passive role. The call to world salvage has now gone out. And today, disciples are assembling all over the world. Remember how the forces of restoration, the forces of enlightenment, and the forces of reconstruction all participate in this world salvage. The times are just filled with opportunity, and obviously I'm not caring whether this was written 90 years ago, 85 years ago, or even could be written today. Each of the masters is sending out the call, and many probationary disciples, though they could be true aspirants, and many probationary disciples, even though placed upon the furthest point in the periphery of the master's influence, are responding with eagerness. Their motives are normally mixed, and their response is frequently galvanized by a desire for personality progress and aggrandizement. Let us not forget how insidious is this urge towards aggrandizement. Then we will surprise ourselves, I think. They are, at this particular time, greatly complicating the call to service, because, that is what it really amounts to. Ultimately, a call to service, a call to use everything you have in the service of your brothers and sisters. They are, at this time, these probationers, greatly complicating the call to service, and their distortions are bringing about the fulfillment of the New Testament prophecy that at the time of the end, the end of the greater age of Pisces, or now the lesser age, but of the beginning of both a lesser and greater Aquarian age, that has to be mentioned, their distortions are bringing about the fulfillment of the New Testament prophecy that at the time of the end, there will be much distortion of truth. concerning the spread of the Christ consciousness and the return of the Christ or the second coming. The Christians wrap their expectation around the hope of the second coming, but we can tell from reading Master Decay that their picture of the second coming is very different from his. Responding with eagerness. Okay. Mixed motives. Well, we've been told that the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven will be shouted from the rooftops. Now, I suppose those are the legitimate mysteries, and there are so many distortions. We, as members and potential members of the new group of world servers, have to be in a position to logically, clearly, reasonably explain why we believe that the retained illusions of so many are in fact distortions. It's just how it goes. We have a job because we are somewhat educated in these matters, and others are not. The second coming is extremely important in the reorientation of humanity. But as DK has explained in the reappearance of the Christ and elsewhere frequently, the normal presentation of that second coming is distorted. And you will not be met with gracious patience as you attempt to point out the distortions that are being entertained by the individual bound by illusion and swept by glamour, by the individual that you are attempting to bring light to. I can't say you are attempting to enlighten such a person, because that might produce the wrong attitude in the enlightener, but at least to share something of the light of the ageless wisdom, which can bring an enhanced quality of spiritual life to millions who are violent, full of desire, their violence stemming from their unquestioning belief that the estimations they hold are correct. We see this now in the sadly and dangerously divided United States, divided along the Geminian line, the two warring brothers, with each side convinced of its rectitude. And now the final paragraph. And so, from stage to stage, the disciple passes, going from light to light, from perception to perception, from force to energy, from personality focus to soul integration, and then from soul to spirit, from form to life. Well, this takes us ever forward and is synthetic. And we have to have that sense of the progress that we are undergoing. We're not just reading a bunch of good books and becoming au fait with what they say. We are making progress. And the way we make progress has everything to do with whether we unnaturally retard that progress or whether we move rapidly ahead as the hierarchy would have us move. He has explored, this is the disciple, has explored all the avenues of knowledge. He has descended into the depths, into hell, oftentimes looked at as the lower two subplanes of the astral plane, and into the valleys. When you look at the sign Aquarius, we have the hill and valley experience. So we can't be on top of the mountain all the time. And our descent into the valleys is for the sake of those who live in those valleys, but live unhappily. He has climbed the mountaintop of initiation on the basis of his own strength. That would be ideal. And that same mountain of initiation is also the mountain of vision, which the Tibetan enjoins that we climb again as much as possible for ourselves, instead of simply waiting for the next information downflow. So he's climbed the mountaintop of initiation, and from there has swung out beyond space and time, overcoming, let me say, that first illusion, or at least the first illusion that can be overcome and must be overcome. Now, this is a tough one, and let's put ourselves to the test on it. He has lost all self-interest. And is a focused point of thought in the mind of God. I am a point of light within the mind of God. I am a strand of loving energy within the stream of love divine. I am a point of sacrificial fire, focused within the will of God. What's it like to live beyond the illusion of time and space? Almost inconceivable to the average consciousness. But what if time, as we conceive it, doesn't really exist? And what if all of space and its apparent content can be gathered to a point? Well, there are ways to think about that, and we try to practice some of those ways in our identify as being study group, study meditation group. There are those in the Vedanta tradition who say that really, in terms of reality, the universe or any universe never really arose. And one can understand their thinking in that regard. Yes, the Maya arises, but it's not reality. So this overcoming of time and of space one has to dwell upon it. And then, as I was saying, he has lost all self-interest and is a focused point of light, a focused point of thought in the mind of God. Can I say more than this? The Tibetan asks, and then he answers his own question, and he basically says, I think not. I think I cannot. Lost all self-interest. What an amazing concluding phrase. It's worn away in an appreciation of an ever larger context and of ever new transpersonal and impersonal points of tension. And so, says the Tibetan, I bring to an end this series of instructions, and my responsibility in this connection is ended. And in a most impressive statement, he says, yours now begins. Well, it's just such a remarkable material. And I'm sure any constant reader, meditator, and server knows how extraordinary is the material. The unfortunate thing happened to create a cleavage between Agni Yoga and the Alice Bailey works. I must say it is my opinion, after reading and rereading all of this, and rereading, that Madame Roerich was not careful in her reading. She jumped to conclusions, I feel. And she failed to realize that the Tibetan, of whom she expected certain nefarious Black Lodge tendencies, was Jwal after all, whose photograph was in her very museum. This is the irony. One has to take the time to study very carefully the quality of what is written. Of course, I have seen that the Alice Bailey students, including Alice Bailey, and including Alice Bailey herself, were far more accepting of Agni Yoga than was the case of the Agni Yogans being accepting of Alice Bailey. But then supposedly they were on this first ray. And many of them, because of the very devoted attitude of Madame Roerich, were on the sixth ray, which we know can reject all too easily that which is not exactly along their line. But the second ray is more inclusive. And the second ray saw how wonderful was the work of Madame Roerich and how inspiring were the words taken down by her, that some of which were actually Master Moria's words. Others were modified impressions and still from him, and still others were the work of the publishers, i.e. Madame Roerich and Nicholas Roerich. So we see that it's possible to have cleavage, separation, that great heresy, at even very high levels of initiation. We assume the initiate status of Madame Roerich, and we assume the initiate status of Alice Bailey, and we know that cleavage appeared. Well, if it can appear at that level, how can we prevent it from appearing at the level where we stand, which is lower on the turn of the spiral? And I suppose I would say, read with care, with extreme care, which in my own life I've tried but never been able to fulfill to my own satisfaction. But read with extreme care, in this case, what Master DK is really saying. And do your very best to assimilate, perhaps by reading again or listening again, if it's a video commentary, for instance, or simply an audio commentary, which might be more convenient, because so many of us don't know the way to contact the Master directly. And DK, knowing this, there's been given to us in written form a mode of communication, which is extremely important to develop during the coming Aquarian age. So with 4 years or so left in the period of the forerunner, and material of such uncontested value of those, or by those who know, let's become the knowers, not just the believers, as was the case so long ago, but let us learn the occult detail, even though it is academic and not yet the real thing. Still, it is an indication and can guide us on the path of learning, so we can be more satisfied, a little bit anyway, with our higher attainment, something so hard for the second ray type to experience. I'm simply eager for myself and for everybody else that the content of this book be wisely and steadily assimilated and applied in meditation and in the service which represents the divine plan, whatever it is you choose as your line of service. We can never say that we have not received enough instruction. We have received, in my view anyway, an overwhelming amount of instruction. I think of all the books that I have not yet commented upon and drawing lines of relationship, and probably in this incarnation will not have time to do. And I just feel a sense of urgency about knowing what's there and assimilating what's there. And I've spent 50 years doing this, actually. 50, maybe more than 50, yeah, more like 60 years, something like that. And I'm eager for you, the students of esotericism, to do more than you have done, even as I hope to do more than I have done. And then the promise of this 60-year age of the forerunner will come closer to fulfillment. By the end of it, we should be ready for the appearance of the new dispensation, the third installment from Master DK. We should also be ready for the implications of the deliberations at the Great Conclave of 2025, and to be discerning enough to know from whence those indications are coming. There are many teachers standing on rooftops, screaming the teaching in a way that is both true and not true. Somehow, it's going to be up to us to discern the real from the counterfeit. People can't help the counterfeiting, you know. Their training only goes so far, and their sense of discrimination can only separate the wheat from the chaff to a certain degree. They can't quite help it. What should we say? Forgive them, Father. They know not what they read. Okay, well, in so many esoteric bookstores, channeled works of high glamored content are front and center and chosen by those who do not know. Then along comes a book, we cannot call it old, called Discipleship in the New Age. And it gives us the tools for discrimination and the ability to discern the real from the unreal in all of the mist and fog and wishful thinking that humanity can preserve. So let's really take advantage of these wonderful books and take the indications even further, if it is possible for us. I think it is possible for us to do that if we have the right attitude. Maybe chances of this nature, opportunities, will not so readily come along. Maybe in our next incarnation, we will be very much involved with the third installment. And we don't know quite how long that will last, but one suspects something like the year 2200, somewhere in there. It's not our place to worry about what will be in this third installment or how long it will last. We just want to plunge into it and round out our understanding of this three-part set of bridging treatises, which the Tibetan, a great communicator, is bound by chosen duty to bring forward. So, my friends, I suppose I could keep talking, which might be a little self-defeating at this point. Just study this material very closely. You almost certainly will extract different values from it than I may have indicated. I'm just telling you what comes to my mind and how a network of light, which Master DK's teaching is, can be absorbed increasingly by your consciousness. What else can I do at the moment? I have considerable humility in the face of these books, and I judge that it is authentic humility, never enough, but still authentic, when we look at all there is to learn and to know and to practice on our planet, in related planets in the solar system, and also the local cosmo system, even the local super cosmic system, which extends to the one about whom naught may be said, or so we call him. We've been given so much, and let's act in a manner which is appreciative, filled with gratitude, which Master Moria tells us have the best fires, as he says. Let's do that. And somehow together be more ready than otherwise might have been the case for the great conclave of 2025 and for the offering of the third part, the third installment of the threefold bridging series of treatises that the Tibetan, as a great messenger, is obliged to bring to us, and thus to a number of the lower kingdoms over which we, humanity, are a kind of macrocosm. I also want to invite you, of course, to participate in the rather strenuous curriculum of the Moria Federation. Basically, it's Master DK's curriculum for the preparatory schools, which does not mean it's the complete curriculum, because that would be impossible for us at this stage. But you can join us, whether you are new to the Ageless Wisdom or just getting into it, or have some degree of real experience. There's always something for you there. And I think we have to do our part in preparing for the new esoteric schools. So, as the Tibetan says, I bring to an end this series of instructions, and my responsibility, which he has admirably fulfilled, in this connection is ended. Yours, mine, now begins. So Tuya and I and all of the communications group, BL and Joe Waltz and Michael Stacy and Michael Crow, I hope I don't leave anybody out. Those of us who are trying to bring the ageless wisdom to you, we offer our love and many blessings as you forge ahead, making the great gift your own. If you've missed any of these communications, this is number 26, and they are listed both on the Makara website and on Moria Federation Esoteric Education, our YouTube channel. I hope you can derive from it, from all this, a great deal which impels you upon the higher way. Lots of love from all of us. Bye for now.